Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 50 Shades of Tay. I'm your host, Taylor Gonzalez, and today I am joined by a GOAT, a legend in the industry. Not only is he a director, a producer, most importantly, my friend, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett is here. Rob, how are you doing?
Well, my little bear cub, it's so nice to be speaking with you again.
I can't believe it's been since July since we've hung out.
It's since the birthday?
No, July was Comic-Con.
Oh, right. That's right. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Oh my God, I know. I got lit, and then I had to walk 5 blocks to my hotel.
I was
Speaking of
pretty
lit,
lit there as well.
did
I
you get a
I no, I'm just drinking water.
moonshine?
Yeah, that's right. I've got my it's ever clear. That's what it is.
Yeah, two
Everclear.
two jugs of moonshine. Well, cheers to being reunited.
It feels so good.
Hmm.
It sounds like a song.
So I have about, I don't know, it could be 15 questions, could be 69, who knows at this point.
Ooh,
I know. But
I will answer anything you want to know.
what's funny about this though is like normally when I do interviews, I have to research people and look into what they've done and their accomplishments and what films they've worked on. But I only had to look up one thing, and I think it was a character name. So I'm proud of myself that after working two jobs together so far, that I
Wow.
knew all this off the top of my head.
Oh my God.
I know, I know. So
What
Rob,
character name?
oh,
Are we
you'll
gonna get to
see.
that?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. What made you want to get into the movie industry?
Well, it's a good question. Kind of always knew. I mean, when I was a little kid, uh, I, I remember starting to watch movies seriously when I was like 5. And what led me to that was, I watched Star Trek and The Twilight Zone and Outer Limits. And on the channel that those were airing on in Seattle, they also had sci-fi theater on Sundays at 2 o'clock. So I'd go to synagogue and Sunday morning I had to go to religion school, Sunday school. And then I would come home afterwards and turn on the TV and watch sci-fi theater. And on sci-fi theater, they had all these classic science fiction movies. Like they would show War of the Worlds, which was produced by George Pal. And then they showed When Worlds Collide, and which is another movie he produced, and Conquest of Space. So George Pal was like the first guy that whose name I recognized in the credits because War of the Worlds was my favorite movie when I was 5 years old. And they had all these Godzilla movies and Ray Harryhausen stop motion movies like the Jason the Argonauts. And I just wanted to do that. And I didn't know what that was, but growing up also my mom would take me to the theater to see movies. And like it was really fun because back then the movies that were coming out in the theater no one had ever seen anything quite like them. And, I saw Jaws in the theater when I was 8. And that was a huge, huge thing to see those movies. And then what really solidified it was seeing Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
When I was 10 years old, I saw it the weekend it first came out, and it was mind-blowing because it's hard for people to think about this now, but there was nothing like Star Wars ever. So no one had seen anything remotely similar to that. The
Mhm.
kind of lived in realistic fantasy universe. I mean, it was so mind blowing. And then after that, there was like the making of Star Wars documentary that was on TV.
Mhm.
And that was the thing, like, oh my God. It was the first time I really remember seeing models being used to film things and but that was the first time I remember seeing behind the scenes.
Mhm.
And then there was a TV show on after that that was called That's Hollywood
Mhm.
that Tom Bosley hosted. And again, it was a show that went into, I mean, this is before the cable channels and TMC and Turner Classic Movies, or TCM, pardon me. And it was all about how movies are made. And I was just fascinated by it. And it was the thing that really then solidified it for me all after all that was the VCR came out. And I started working. I got a VCR. I was the first kid on my block to have a VCR when I was 13. And I just would hang out in the video store. And there was one video store, and the video store I would hang out in, they eventually gave me a job even at 13, was the second video store in the United States. And I just started watching movies, obsessively. And that's when I started to really study them. And I would go to the once my parents started letting me ride public transportation, I could plot and I could go to movies in downtown Seattle or in Bellevue or even further out. So I started really seeking movies out. And that's what kind of solidified it for me. I'm like, I want to work in I didn't know anybody in the movie business living in Seattle. I didn't know how I would get involved in the movie business, but I just knew I wanted to work in film somehow.
And so you got your start, your very first job, correct me if I'm wrong, you were in the art department for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yes. Yeah, it was funny. I just finished my senior year in college at USC, and it was like a week later, this woman that I knew from Seattle, I don't even know how she got the job. Her sister was like an executive at Universal. And so she was like the production coordinator. And she called me up and she goes, "How would you like to come work on a horror film?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And it was like, I didn't even have to look for a job. I'd just gotten out of school.
Uh-huh.
I'd been in California for a year. And there I was. My first job right out of school was being the art department PA on a movie. And it was like, I couldn't believe it. It was the coolest thing ever. But to be fair, I was really scared.
Mhm.
It was one of those things.
Because it was a horror movie, or
No, no, because I didn't know what to do.
Mhm.
You realize that when you've gone to film school and you've studied things academically, it has no bearing on what it's like to work on a set.
Mhm.
And to be fair, I had been on like commercial sets and things like that, but I'd never been on a working movie set that I was going to be working on. And this was what was really interesting. It was 10 weeks before we started shooting. So I was one of the first people hired because the art department was the only department that was working,
Mhm.
because we had to build in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We built 2 sets on location from scratch. One was a gas station and one was the farmhouse where the majority of the action took place. And the farmhouse was being built in the hills behind Magic Mountain up in Valencia. And so I got to be a part of all that. And the first day on the job, they handed me $10,000 in cash and a
Dang.
list of what to buy.
Uh-huh.
They're like, "Okay, you need to get all these things." And I'm like, not knowing the first thing about being on a set, I'm like, and they're like, "Great." And I got into work at like 7 o'clock in the morning. And by 7:30, I had $10,000 in cash and a list. And they said, "Don't come back until you have, yeah, until you have everything on this list."
And on that list was the bumper sticker, right? Is that what you needed? I remember, so the first time Rob and I ever met, we went to like the best lunch ever. It was supposed to be like a quick 30-minute lunch, and I think it was like 4, 5, six
Oh,
hours long. We
with
drank,
Martika.
yeah, with Martika from Designing Hollywood, and we had, I don't know how many bottles of wine, but you told me this story, and I think about it all the time. I tell all my friends about it because I think it's so crazy. Do you mind telling us a story about the bumper
Yeah.
sticker?
So one of the things on the list that they wanted me to get was a "Don't Mess with Texas" bumper sticker. And this is pre-internet. And I'm like, we're in California. Like, I was like, where the hell? And I couldn't ask, like I couldn't, because this whole thing was a test. Here I was, 22 years old. And I just turned 22. And so I was just thinking, okay, let me stop and think about this. Where would you buy bumper stickers anyway? And I thought about it, like, does 7-Eleven sell bumper stickers? Not really. And I was like, where? And I thought to myself, a truck stop. Is there a truck stop around here? It's California. There's trucks going to and fro all the time. So we were up in Valencia and I found a big truck stop that had like rooms, like a motel you could stay overnight. It was one of these gigantic truck stops that had like a diner, and it had a big gift shop. And it was like 25 miles away from the where we were in our production offices. So I'm like, I guess I'll just go there. And so I go to this, and again, I didn't even call them up because, I probably could have. I didn't think about calling them. I just went.
Mhm.
And so I get there, and because I figured it was so specific, and if they had bumper stickers, they probably had lots of bumper stickers.
Right.
Like one of those spindle racks. So what am I going to do? Do you have? So when I get there, They had hundreds of bumper stickers, like so many bumper stickers. And I found they did, in fact, for real. I mean, the classic ass, gas, or grass, nobody rides for free. I mean, they
Huh.
had 10 different variations of that, but they had, in fact, don't mess with Texas bumper stickers.
Wow.
And that's when I thought to myself, I'm like, I mean, I was told to get, and I'm like, I'm not going to get one because who
Mhm.
knows where they're going to be. Like, I don't, so I bought them all. All
Damn.
three, there was three different kinds, and I bought all of them. And then I went about my day. And then another thing on that job that I was able to do was they sent me to like a butcher supply place, like a restaurant outlet, because they wanted me like they're like, so imagine people are gonna bodies are gonna be hanging from these things, and you'd hit a button and you'd so you could bring in the slabs of meat. And I'm like, well, what does that look like? So I asked the guy, I go, look, okay. So and I told him we're making this horror film, and he actually I bought this hanging. It was like a metal box that had a red button and a green button and a red button on it.
Uh,
So one or the other, and it was hanging off. And I bought all this stuff because I thought, well, that. So no one told me.
mhm.
It was on a list. Get this. They're like, get what you can, kind of a thing. And so I come back with all of this stuff, and the first thing out of Mick Strawn was the name of the production designer, and the first thing out of his mouth, he goes, "Do you have don't mess with Texas bumper stickers?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I wasn't going to be like, like, do I? I was just like, "Yes, sir, I do." And I pulled them all out, and I said, "I didn't know how many you would need." And they had three different kinds. So I figured it's better to give you a choice. And here they all are. And he looked at me, he goes, "You can come back tomorrow."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. And
incredible.
I was like, yeah, man. All right. And it was really interesting because I I was given a lot of responsibility. I mean, it's my first job, my first day on a movie, and I realized that one, it was a lot different than I thought it was going to be. It was like I was all by myself with a bunch of cash and a list, and I had leeway to go get. I mean, certain things they would send me to very specific places to like pick up a color of paint. Like I have to go to South Central LA where this company existed, and I'd have to buy that paint that they told me to get. But a lot of the time I had leeway. So it was actually creative. I had creative input, which is something that I didn't anticipate. And I didn't take it lightly. And then I didn't realize that once I was working there, sometimes I'd work for the prop department, and those guys were a whole different kettle of fish. And then I would work for and it was so much fun. And then by the time we got to shooting,
Mhm.
it was incredible. I mean, because you're on set, and if they need more blood or they need more bones and whatever it is they need,
Mhm.
you were there dressing the sets. It was just incredible. It was
Ah,
absolutely the most incredible experience.
that sounds
I
like
and I got my name
amazing.
in the credits,
Yeah, that's
and that
incredible.
was it was that movie had a really torturous post production because it kept getting rated X. So they had to reshoot the ending because the ending was way too violent. It had a chainsaw fight, and Ken Foree got his face chainsawed off. I mean, it was really
Dang.
so it was brutal. So it
Mhm.
took a long time for the movie to come out because they thought that they were going to have a franchise like New Line was making this movie. They thought this was going to replace Nightmare on Elm Street
Mhm.
because they made a lot of night. But the problem was, even I was like, this movie is not a cannibal family that eats people and chops them up with chainsaws. It's not quite like the fun of Freddy Krueger and his knives for
Right.
fingers. I mean, it's brutal. I mean, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre to this day is still a brutal
Mhm.
watch. And so it was the only Texas Chainsaw movie that New Line made because it didn't really work out when they had to cut the movie back. It didn't do well at the box office, but it was still cool to see my name in the credits of a movie.
That's so
So,
incredible.
yeah.
Rob, right now I am speaking to someone in the industry that I look up to and that inspires me. Who is somebody in the film industry that inspires you?
Well, I think I've always been inspired by directors, but I have to say, and I'm going to say this because he just passed away, but the director Jeff Burr, who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, was very nice to me. He was actually the second person I met in the production office, and I didn't. He was so like because all shucks kind of a guy, and I was like, I didn't when I first went in. I said, "Hi, I'm Rob Burnett. I'm here for the art department." I didn't know he was the director. He goes, "Oh yeah, man. Let me just take you back to the art department." And he didn't tell me who he was on purpose because he could see I was nervous. And he took me back to the art department. And then he introduced himself. And I think it was Mick Strawn who said, "Oh, great. So you get the director to bring you back here. Great." And so it was, I mean, they were ribbing me. But he recently passed away. They had his memorial service last weekend. But he was a guy that I would bump into at parties and see around town. And he was so enthusiastic. And then 10 years later, I ran into him. I was directing my first movie, my only movie, as it turns out, on Hollywood Boulevard. And he was just randomly walking down the street.
Oh, wow.
And so he stopped and he's like, "Hey man, you're directing. That's great." And he stood and watched for a couple hours while I directed these scenes on Hollywood Boulevard. And it was so cool because, he was somebody I knew in the industry, and I knew him for 30 years. And we'd see each other, and he was always really enthusiastic, and he was a really talented guy. I wish he'd made more movies in his life, but it's really hard to get a movie off the ground.
Yeah.
But I mean, because he was somebody I got to work with and watch how talented he was, and he was always really, really nice to me, and I was very lucky to have that experience. So I would have to say there's other people I've known and worked with, like Bryan Singer is somebody I've known him my whole life in LA pretty much, and I watched him navigate his career from the time he'd only made a short to becoming the last movie he made grossed $900 million, which was Bohemian Rhapsody. So I've always looked up to him, and he's let me make documentaries for him. So I've been lucky. I mean, I've met a lot of people. And then there's all the people I've interviewed. Like I was able to interview James Cameron once, and he's always been an inspiration. And at the time, his now ex-wife, Gail Ann Hurd, she was very inspiring to me. And there's just so many people and I've been lucky to have met a lot of them in the industry.
Awesome.
And it's a lot of, yeah, I feel very fortunate.
Some people would say that, look at this transition. You're going to be so proud. Some people would say that someone that inspires them is Moses. And speaking of Moses, you voiced Moses in Tango Shalom, which I got the pleasure of watching at the AMC Burbank 6. Rob, how did you end up as the voice of Moses?
Here's another, this is a great Hollywood story. So my old college roommate was representing an author, and he'd come to California, and he was staying at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood. And I was just standing out there outside waiting for my car, and we were just chatting because he was going to go back in and I was going to go home. And while we're standing out there, a woman turns around and asks us both where something was, and we answered, and she said, "Oh, are you guys here with the AFM, which is the American Film Market, which they had a lot of events at the Roosevelt and in Santa Monica and things like that." And I said, "No." And I asked her, is she working on something? She's like, "Yeah, I'm a producer on this movie, and we finished shooting about, I don't know, like 9 months ago. But we don't have an editor." And I said, "I'm an editor." I mean, it's literally waiting for my car. And she goes, "Well, you should call the director." And I'm like, "Okay." And this was back, I want to say this was like in, I don't know, December of 2015. And so and then like in February, I ended up calling the director, but it was the holidays, Gabe Bologna, who's the son of Joseph Bologna, the actor. And I said, "Hey man, I'd be interested in taking a look at what you've got." And we sat down, and we had a very sake soaked sushi lunch that lasted like 4 hours. And he's like, "Well, I had just finished editing a low budget science fiction movie called Paradox. So I had this thing that I could show him." I said, "Well, I just finished cutting this, and take a look." And he liked it. And he said, "Well, great, you're hired." And so I started working on this movie, and it was kind of a mess. I mean, it was a very low budget movie, and they didn't really have much of an ending. So I knew it was going to be a big job. And the movie opened with this dream sequence, and the dream sequence was shot with no sound. And it was Moses and the Israelites looking for the promised land. And this this rabbi, the main character, wakes up after having this dream. It wasn't but the way it was shot was different than how we ended up using it. So we needed Moses to talk. And so Gabe said he found like, well, this is what Moses is saying, behold the promised land. And so that's what he said on camera. And then we made him say stuff after that. So when we're cutting together, I just scratch tracked his voice with my own. I just, behold the promised land. I was like, and it had been in there for the 4 years we spent working on the film. It took us 4 years on and off because I had to raise the money and we had to go back and forth. And when it came time to finish the sound mix, I'm like, hey, we should get like a celebrity voice to be Moses. And Gabe's like, no. I want you to be Moses. And I'm like, really? I mean, yeah, I can't imagine the movie without your voice in it. So what was funny was then I had to go to a professional recording studio and get in a booth and talk, and record my voice for the movie I'd worked on for 4 years. It was such a weird experience because our sound designer, Steve, he did it. He recorded me, and it's hilarious because the first time I saw the movie, I'd seen this movie 100 million times editing it, but when I saw it in a theater, I couldn't stop laughing. I was just like, I was laughing so hard because it was wild to hear my voice come out of Moses's mouth, even though I'd seen it happen for 4 years. But to hear it in a theater, and the people that recognized my voice, they all laughed.
Yeah, I laughed because I had no clue you were going to voice Moses. I just knew that you were working on editing it. So I was like, oh, wow. It was a surprise, but it was really fun.
Yeah. So that's how I did it, and that's another thing people need to understand about when you work in entertainment. You never know what you're going to wind up doing.
Mm-hmm.
You just never, if someone says, yep, will you voice Moses? Yes, I can.
Yeah.
The answer should always be yes.
Yep.
You never go, like when I was freelance editing, computer-based editing software was pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
Like I started editing in the mid 90s, and when the Avid came out, I kind of taught myself. And as I started working on music videos and things, there was stuff that I didn't know how to do, like doing graphics things. And how could I pull this off? I would always take jobs and people would say, do you know how to do this? Do you know how to do that? And I'd be like, yes, I do, even though I didn't. And I would just take those because you never say no to a job. You always say yes. And I would figure it out. And there was some times where I'm like, I don't even know. I'm clueless how we're going to do this because people were pushing. They thought that computers could do anything. Like there was a thought that, you can't just push a button and it'll happen. And I'm like, no, because like if you wanted to do movement or things, graphics, you had to plot all of that on the screen and you had to wait for it to render, each frame to render. And sometimes I worked on this music video for a guy named Josh Clayton Felt, who was in a band called School of Fish. And he later passed away from cancer, unfortunately. But the director had made this documentary style music video of this whole album being recorded. And like he wanted it to all look like it was on photographic contact sheets. Like when you'd get headshots or something, you'd do like 10, you'd see like 10 or 20 on one piece of paper. And he wanted it to do all of that. And so I had to insert video into frames of, it was a nightmare. And the thing took 2 weeks and half the day we'd spend rendering these graphic moves and stuff. And you didn't know if it was going to work until it was done rendering. So sometimes it would render for 2 hours and you're like, nope, that's not quite right. We have to fix it and change it. And then you change it and then you'd have to wait for it to render it was just a nightmare. But when it was finished, it looked really cool. And I still go back and look at that. The song was called Inarticulate Nature Boy. And that's I think the album was called that too. And because somebody challenged Josh, like, what's the most ridiculous name that you could call this record? And that's the name he came up with. So that was the title track. And I look at that and I think, wow, that was done almost 30 years ago. And when I find it's a hard video to find, but if you can find it, you can see what we did. And I just, believe me when I tell you, it was a nightmare.
Oh my gosh.
Nightmare doing that.
Well,
nowadays you can just be like,
yeah, that is crazy. Speaking of nightmares, lately I have been interviewing a lot of horror directors. I have had Sam Irvin, who directed Elvira's Haunted Hills, which was incredible. I had the Bloomquist brothers who just worked together and came out with Founders Day, which is a new slasher that's in theaters right now. So I was talking to my boyfriend David, and I was like, "Hey, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen?" And guess what he said? I'll give you a hint. You produced it.
The Hills Run Red.
Yeah, he said that's the scariest movie he's ever seen. And I was like, really?
I'll take it.
Yeah. So, what is a fun behind the scenes story you could tell me about producing The Hills Run Red?
Okay, this is pretty funny. So in The Hills Run Red, it's about this maniacal director who believes that he needs to kill people on screen for his art, essentially. So, and he's roped in his daughter, who he's raised to be a psychopath. And there's a scene where they're cutting someone's they put this they crank this device up around this guy's torso, and when his stomach is poking through, she uses a straight razor to open his stomach up. Well, all of that stuff was prepared weeks before we shot it in the United States, and it was shipped to Bulgaria where we were shooting it. And they use like real meat, like chicken meat. So it had been in there roasting in the hot sun and the heat for weeks. So when we filmed the scene, I cannot tell you how bad the stench was when we're shooting the scene, pumping the blood through.
Oh my
And
God.
when it was open up, because it was, imagine just rotted meat that had been rotting for weeks.
Ugh.
And it was I mean, it looks great on camera,
Mhm.
but it was so gag inducing that I think people actually threw up
Oh my
because it
gosh.
smelled
Yeah.
that bad.
Oof.
I wouldn't do that again.
Yeah, I would not recommend that.
So bad. But we were like, what were you thinking? What were you thinking doing something like that and then doing it weeks later? Of course it was going to be disgusting and
Oof.
horrible. I mean, they couldn't have used something, but it had to look like real, meat. But I'm like, couldn't we have? But they had to make it because they had all the equipment at their studio here in the States.
Mhm.
They couldn't have I'm like, you couldn't have made it here. Come on.
Ugh.
But that was that, when you're making a movie, here's another story that, so when we're shooting in Bulgaria, nothing in Bulgaria looks like the United States.
Mhm.
The language is different. It's Cyrillic, different alphabet. The alphabet's the Cyrillic alphabet because Bulgarian's kind of the basis for Russian. So everything has to be made. You can't point a camera down a city street and have it be America because nothing, you'd have to change all the signs. And another thing we couldn't find was cars that look like American cars. And you don't think about this stuff when you're going to a foreign country. And we had the main characters driving like this SUV. So we had to find one. And we found this, I think it was like a Toyota RAV4. I think that's something like that. And we didn't own it. It was owned by private citizens and we rented it from them. But when you're shooting a car sequence, you mount cameras on the doors, you roll down the windows, and so you can shoot into the car. And you never think about this. Well, in Europe, they have rules. So the windows on the driver's side and passenger side did not roll down all the way. They only rolled down halfway. And that means we couldn't shoot. And we didn't even realize this until the camera company, we have the car, the camera guys, the camera crew, they're putting on the mounts on the walls and all that. And after they were all up, we rolled down the window. Oops,
Oops.
can't shoot. So you're sitting there going, because it's something you don't think about. Like we
Right.
should have thought about this, but this was something that was such a thing that it was because nobody ever thought about the fact that why wouldn't the windows roll down all the way? Well, in Europe, they have different. So we didn't. So the question, we're standing there and you're burning time.
Mhm.
You're supposed to get a shot off every 10 minutes. So we had to make the decision. This was owned by private citizens, and we're a low budget movie. We could either break the glass,
Mhm.
in which case we didn't know if we could get the glass repaired in Bulgaria, and how long would it take? Because we needed to shoot and we needed the glass to go back up, so we couldn't do that. So they decided to take the door apart
Oh my God.
and take the glass out. So every time we were shooting from of the four windows, because there's people in the back seats in the front, we had to take the glass out of the doors, which added, we lost half our day. And this was the second day shooting. And if you lose half your day on a tight schedule, the studio in Warner Brothers is going, they're looking at the production schedule going, why did you only get through half of the work that you were supposed to get through on the second day? Do you have some maniacal director?
Oh man.
And it was not good. And my line producers were all getting yelled at, and they're like, "Well, we could replace Dave Parker." I'm like, he he came in early on day one. I mean, we finished early on day one. You're not going to fire him because you people couldn't figure out that the windows couldn't roll down all the way. So there I was, the second day of me producing a horror film in a foreign country for a studio for Warner Brothers, and I'm like in an argument with my fellow line producers who would just as well see Dave and I gone. They would finish the movie and do it the way they wanted to. And, you know, we're talking about our vision and what this movie's going to be and blah, blah, blah. And they would love to get rid of us, the auteurs. And luckily, I said to him, I go, they're driving shots. We can make those up at the end of the schedule where we don't have the whole crew. We only need a skeleton crew, and we'll do it on the last day. And they're like, oh, okay. So there I was on the precipice of maybe getting fired on our second day of production. But it was because I had worked on films and done documentaries, and I knew what you could get away with, you know, and I wasn't about to let us get fired because it had taken us 2 years to get to that point to get this movie off the ground. So it was, but you know, you don't think about those kinds of things. It's so funny. You just never know when you have to be ready for anything. You know, it's like the old adage that every battle plan or no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. You know, you think you've planned and planned and planned and planned, and as soon as you actually start doing something, it all goes to hell.
Oh man.
I mean, planning is always good, though. I'm not saying don't plan. You should always plan. Just know that it's going to go to hell. Just know that it's going to go to hell.
So, Rob, my next question is something that I am in awe of. I think this is such a boss move. Agent Cody Banks, how are you the only person who has a single producer credit on the screen?
And there's like 13 producers,
including
Madonna is a producer. Jason Alexander is a producer. Guy Osseri, who was the head of Maverick Records at the time, was a producer on that movie. That movie has a long, convoluted story, but basically, I had partnered up with two other people, Carrie David and Danny Gold. And Danny Gold was once involved trying to get Agent Cody Banks made previously. And then when we teamed up, we were like looking for a project to try and produce. We were looking for scripts and stuff, and send me your scripts. And he remembered the script, and it was written by a limo driver. You know, kind of a young kid who drove a limo for celebrities, and you could rent, you know, limousines for various functions. And he'd written the script, and the script was only okay. But the idea was sound. And the idea was basically Ferris Bueller meets James Bond. And so I had my really good friends, Zach Stentz and Ashley Miller, who later went on to write Thor and X-Men First Class and many different TV shows. We hired them to do a page one rewrite of the script. And the script was incredible. I mean, their script was incredible. It really was James Bond meets Ferris Bueller. And so, you know, we tried, as many people do, we shopped it around. And it went through sort of this convoluted process. And then finally we got to MGM, and MGM, we'd partnered up with another production company that had much more of a track record than we did, because our new company had never produced anything. And that was one of the problems, that we weren't necessarily taken seriously. But when we teamed up with this guy named David Glasser and his production company, they had German financing, and we had a lot more credibility. And we went to MGM, and they wanted to make it immediately. Like, it was the craziest thing. So we had a meeting in February believe it or not, during the AFM, during the American film market, and different film market though, different year. And they decided they wanted to fast track this movie. And when I say fast track, they bought the script in February and started shooting in May.
Wow.
And that doesn't usually happen in Hollywood. And so a couple of things happened. There were these different concerns, different people that were on board as producers. and they all started to squabble because originally I was supposed to be an executive producer. And there was like too many executive producer credits, and everyone's jockeying for a position because a credit on a movie means money. It's how much you're going to get paid. Well, all this squabbling was going to happen, and it was happening, and they were trying to figure out how this was going to work. And I just raised my hand, kind of, and I floated the idea. I said, "Hey," because there was going to be like 8 executive producers or something. And I said, "How about I will not take the executive producer credit." And because that would have solved a lot of problems. I said, "I'll take a co-producer credit instead." Because, executive producers, they come up with the money. And a lot of the time, executive producers aren't necessarily involved in the production of a movie, but a co-producer usually is a co-producer. So what ended up happening is that I said, "Oh, why don't I'll take a co-producer credit, but I want it single card." So in the entertainment business, a single card credit in the main titles means during the main front titles of a movie, you get a single card where you don't share your name with someone else. That's the most, like a director or producer or like an editor or somebody. That's the most desirable thing to have. And I did indeed get that credit.
That
And
is awesome.
it was so funny because the main credits come at the end of the movie. The movie starts, there's no opening credits. But the credits are pretty neat. I mean, they're big block letters. They're multicolored, kind of a silver and blue thing against the sunset and stuff. And when I was at the premiere, I'm at the premiere in Westwood, and we had a big party afterwards. I'm sitting there with, at the time I was married, my wife and I were sitting in the theater, and suddenly my name, Robert Meyer Burnett, is just emblazoned across the screen. And I just laughed, and she just kind of nudges me, and she's like, "How did you do that?" Because we didn't have really much to do. Once we had sold the script, they turned it over, so we didn't really have much to do. We didn't actually have to physically produce the movie. So I went to a few meetings, and then the studio also decided if we had exerted more control than we did, but it was our first movie, so the other production companies, no one was going to let us go physically make a $25 million movie. The three of us never had credits. So what ended up happening is, and this is kind of a bummer, they decided that rather have this, because I thought this movie would be, and it's not, the movie wasn't like this, but I thought the tone was kind of like Back to the Future. So it was a crowd-pleasing movie that was for, high school to college. You're right, that target demographic. Well, the studio, in their infinite wisdom, decides they want to make the movie for tweens, for 8 to 12-year-olds. And that was not, we weren't making a kids movie, a family-friendly movie necessarily. We were making a movie about like the coolest high school senior you'd ever met. But the joke was, in the script, was that he was a badass and could save the world, but people forgot to teach him in his training. He was never taught how to talk to girls. So he was just like James Bond, except he was not suave in the ladies department. And this mission he goes on, this mission he goes on, he's supposed to talk, he's supposed to get close to this professor's daughter, played by Hilary Duff, and Frankie Muniz. They cast Frankie Muniz and Hilary Duff, and that was good. I just wish that if they had gone with the original script, I think it would have made a lot more money, and it would have been a lot more successful because the tone was more adult. And then on the second movie, Agent Cody Banks 2, Destination London, I have my same credit, but I'll tell you, that movie's god awful. And it really is. I mean, while we did get paid for it and all that, the movie is just terrible. And to me, it really taught me a lesson that everybody, look, getting a movie made in Hollywood at all is amazing, but you have to try like hell to fight for your vision of the movie, because the studio is not thinking artistically. They're thinking in terms of, now more than ever, demographics, and they're looking at now spreadsheets. Well, this movie's going to appeal to these people. And it's like, look, man, first and foremost, a movie has to be good.
Right.
At the end of the day, and a corporation does not know the difference between good or bad. They're only looking at analytics, and that's all they can go by. They don't know, like, the whole point of this, our premise was that it's if you make a movie about an 18-year-old high school senior,
Mhm.
it's far more believable that he could have been trained in paramilitary tactics than, say, a 13 or 14-year-old. And so by doing that, by shifting it and making it for younger audiences, it became kind of goofy and unbelievable, at
Mhm.
least for me, because the movie had to be cool. It has to be cool. You have to
Right.
make the movie cool, because if it's not cool, it's not going to appeal to people in high school and college. And you can see right away that they were making a movie for more for kids. And I think, by the way, that kind of thinking is wrong. I think if they'd stuck, they had this idea that they're going to go with the tween audience. And I'm like, yeah, but if you're making a movie for a tween audience, you're losing your adult audience. And what you want is there was a movie that I worked on at Warner Brothers called If Looks Could Kill, which was a similar movie. Richard Grieco played like this secret agent, this young secret agent. And it was directed by William Deere, who directed um, Harry and the Hendersons, I think. And it worked a little better. It was more for an adult audience, and I always thought that they really missed the boat. But when you're working in Hollywood, you have to be able to. That's what's going to happen. More often than not, you're going to fight battles that you can't win, and sometimes it's heartbreaking to lose them because things should have been more successful than they were.
Yeah. Well, this next question is the one that I actually had to Google. I had to figure out your character name. So in the 2006 Superman Returns, you play Cape Canaveral reporter. What was that experience like, and how did that come to happen?
Oh, this is hilarious. So, and by the way, he does have a name, and
Oh,
and then he does have a name, and it's very funny. So during the aughts from 2000 to, well, even all the way up to 2020, I have created I was a producer of special features for DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K discs. And what I used to specialize in and what my company specialized in is we would go overseas for a long period of time. Like I worked for a different company on Lord of the Rings, and we would go to New Zealand for months at a time, shooting interviews and recording audio commentary. I was in New Zealand on Chronicles of Narnia for 14 months. And then right after that, Bryan Singer, I had done X-Men, X-Men 2, and Usual Suspects for him. And he said, it was so funny when Bryan would hire me, I would just get these calls from people I didn't know going, yeah, this is Gil Adler. I'm producing Superman Returns. I need to come to your office, check you out. And I'm like, excuse me? Well, yeah, you're doing our special features. And I'm like, what? Like Bryan would never call me in advance and tell me this was happening. He would get me the jobs, and then I would have to play catch up. So I was in Australia shooting all the behind the scenes on Superman Returns for a year. And they needed somebody like at the last minute. They didn't think about the fact that there's a NASA reporter
mhm.
who's reporting on this shuttle, that there's a shuttle disaster, that Superman has to save this shuttle, and this airplane falls out of the sky. And they needed a reporter, and nobody was cast, and they hadn't thought about it because he's a special effect. He's on a TV screen.
Mhm.
So Brian's like, you're going to do it, Rob. And I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, you're going to do it. Now, these are people that I've been following around for months and months and months, sticking cameras in their faces every single day. And they thought it was hilarious. And so I had to go to wardrobe. They picked out clothes for me, and they coiffed my hair, and I got makeup on. And there I was standing in front of a green screen, and I had lines. Like I have lines of dialogue that I'm saying. And it was one of those things where this has only happened a few times in my life. I was so nervous that my back was sweating. No other part of me was sweating, but it was like somebody took a vase of water and just dumped it down my back. And I was wearing like this kind of like brown or this beige windbreaker, so you couldn't see this, but I could feel my back was just clammy and stuff. And there I am, doing my lines.
Mhm.
And people were cracking up. And I'm
Oh my
like,
God.
I was trying to do them like this. And Brian's like, no, make it more natural. He's directing me. And I couldn't, it was rough, man.
Oh
But
man.
then I mean, you can only see me in the movie. I'm on the TV screen for like 15 frames,
Mhm.
but you hear my dialogue.
Mhm.
And what was so funny was when I finally saw that so I was against a green screen, but they comped me in the background where you saw big satellite dishes like I'm outside of Space Command or whatever, and they gave my character a name. So my character's name is Ross Campbell. Ross Campbell's my
Oh,
name, which I later took as my porn name. I don't know if,
what?
oh yeah, I was in a
I
couple
thought it
of
was
porn movies.
Big Starklighter.
That was the name of my character. Big
Ah,
Starklighter is my character name. Big
all right.
Starklighter was played by Ross Campbell.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. You know, that's still to this day your contact photo in my phone. So whenever I text you or send you a meme, that picture pops up and it makes my day a little bit brighter. So you just
Yeah,
mentioned, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, so it was wild. And when I finally saw it, I'm like, yeah, couldn't you have left me on screen a little bit more? Like maybe a full second, but
Oh
you
my
could
God.
hear me. And I'm in the end credits.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think it's Cape Canaveral reporter,
Cape Canaveral Reporter is what came up when I Googled
Robert Meyer Burnett.
it. That's so cool.
It's just so hilarious. I'm like, yeah, I was in Superman Returns.
Oh, that's
I did
awesome.
not get my SAG card though. I am not a member of the Screen Actors Guild for good reason.
So you
So,
mentioned that you've done behind the scenes documentaries for films including Tron, which
yep.
that is my favorite, I think. The behind the scenes you did for Tron is so good.
Oh,
Uh
thank you.
the Lord of the Rings trilogy, multiple Fox X-Men films, The Chronicle of Narnia, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
Which one of those was your favorite and the most fun to document?
Well, they were all fun in different ways, but for me, I have to say, I mean, Lord of the Rings, being on all those movies was incredible,
Hmm.
but it was Star Trek.
Oh,
I got to do Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek Enterprise. So for
mhm.
3 years, from 2012 to 2014, I was hired by Roger Lay Jr. and his company Urban Archipelago Films, and they remastered Star Trek: The Next Generation for high definition, and they wanted to put new special features on. And so Roger got hired, and he hired me to work with him. And they kind of unleashed us. They basically said, "We'll just do like 15 minutes for each movie." And we're like, or each season. We're like, "Come on," because we were both Star Trek fanatics. So we went deep, and we did 90 minutes. We went balls deep.
Like big
Uh,
Stark lighter.
yeah, we made 90-minute documentaries for all of the
Wow.
seasons,
Mm.
the 7 seasons of Star Trek. Then they released five other discs that had the two-part episodes cut together as one movie, like one program, and then we did more documentaries for those. And then we did other pieces in addition to the documentaries, like we had Seth MacFarlane come in and host. We were the first people to do this, did an inside the writers room piece where
Wow.
we brought back four of the big writers from Next Generation that had also gone on to work for Deep Space Nine and Voyager. And Seth MacFarlane was such a Next Generation fan. He hosted the roundtable. But for me, the highlight of the whole project was I got to sit down
Mm.
with the entire cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation and host on camera the 25th anniversary reunion of
That's
them.
incredible.
And
That would
for
be
me,
like, well, that for me, that would be like if I hosted the 25th reunion for Shrek. Like, I can't even imagine how amazing that must have felt for you.
it was insane.
Mm.
And it was funny because there's been a couple of times I had said to Ken Ross, our boss at CBS, I said, they're having this 25th anniversary event in Calgary in Canada, and all the cast is going to be there. So maybe we could do some kind of a roundtable thing. And he's like, that's a great idea. And so we arrange it. We got this great hotel and this room, this place where we're filming, and we had like 6 cameras. It was a big thing, hair and makeup people. And I said to Ken, I go, we should get like a a celebrity to host this. Ken's like, we don't need a celebrity. You're going to host it. And he goes, this was your idea. And I'm like, he said, nobody knows more about this than you do. And I said, well, that's probably true. He goes, so you're hosting. And I put there's a few clips on my Instagram of that
Oh,
conversation.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and I found some clips from it, and I had to put it up there. So, it was that kind of thing. And the same thing happened to me once in the early '90s. I was the director of special events for the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, and I said, James Cameron's going to do a director's cut of his movie The Abyss, and we should have him come down. and interview him because he's a friend of the Academy, and this was at USC, and somebody should interview him for an hour. And I got a phone call. Yep, James Cameron's coming down, so you better get your questions ready. I'm like, what? You're going to interview him? And I'm like, what? I'm going to interview James Cameron, like one of the most knowledgeable people in the film business. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. And and this was the first big interview that I ever did in my life.
That's
And
awesome.
it was the most nerve-wracking thing. And it's funny. Here's another quick Hollywood story. So I'm at USC. It's packed. It's a 500-seat theater. People are sitting in the aisles. The place is absolutely packed to hear James Cameron speak. And we show The Abyss. And here's what I said. I said, 1984, everybody in this room went to see The Terminator for the first time. And after 100 minutes, we all walked out of that theater breathless, wondering, who is James Cameron and what is he going to do next? Well, to tell us, please welcome James Cameron. And everybody's like screaming and yelling. James Cameron walks on stage. He looks at me, and the applause dies down. And he says, if you left the theater after 100 minutes, you would have missed the end of the movie because Terminator is 108 minutes long.
Damn.
And the whole audience erupted into riotous laughter. Now, you have to understand, I had done research for weeks to lead up to this. So I was destroyed. I was like,
oh,
and I had to, but I couldn't, I had to keep it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to sit down, and for an hour, I interviewed him. For an hour. It was the longest hour of my life, but it was great. And after it was over, he shook my hand, and James Cameron looked me in the eye and he said, I very much appreciate how prepared you were for this interview.
Oh, that's
because he
awesome.
knew I'd done all my research and all these questions and stuff. And I was like, yes.
That must have felt so rewarding. Was it underwater, this interview, or was it above water?
It was above water. I didn't have to go to the bottom of a pool. But it was, yeah. I mean, and the funny thing about it is, as a fan, growing up as a movie fan and falling in love with all these people's work and stuff, it has been so gratifying to actually meet people that some of my heroes, and interact with them. I mean, there's some people I've never met. Like I've never met Steven Spielberg. I've never met like Stephen King. I mean, he's an author, but he's worked on so many other movies. But I've met a lot of people that I was a huge fan of, and for the most part, they've been all delightful.
Oh, that's great.
I haven't met anyone who was a dick. I had a conversation. I met Tom Cruise once, and we had a conversation for an hour just about his career. And once he knew that because we were waiting for a screening, we both showed up. We were both given the wrong time, so he showed up an hour early, and we were the only two people there. I was with two of my friends, but so him and I'm like, listen, I just flat out said, since you're here, can I ask you a few questions about your career? And at first, because what am I going to do? Am I going to launch into some weird questions about Surrey or Katie Holmes, or because they were there too?
Yeah.
I was, and all that stuff. And no, I said, the first thing I said, I go, listen, man, one of my favorite movies, and one of the movies I really love that you were in, was Risky Business. And Paul Brickman, the writer-director, only really made Risky Business in a movie called Men Don't Leave. And I wonder if there's anything, you recollect about making the film. And once I asked him that question, I mean, he just snapped. It was like, ding, and laser focus.
Wow.
And I was just off to the races. And he was so interesting, and he had such insight into the filmmaking process. I mean, he'd been making movies. This was back, we're at a screening for Valkyrie, the movie he made where he played von Stauffenberg, the Nazi, the plot to kill Hitler. So this was 2009. And it was so great to speak with him, because he didn't understand. It was so funny. He was looking at me, and I was going movie by movie. I talked to him about Legend and A Few Good Men. I didn't just talk to him about Top Gun.
Right.
And I was going through all these films, and he's like, you don't even have any notes. And so I'm asking him he was like, how do you know all this stuff? And I'm just like, and I'm like, it was hard to explain when you're a movie fanatic like I was, and I worked in video stores for 8 years, and I've did all this stuff. Film was never casual to me. Like when I'm not working on something, I'm reading film books, or I'm watching other movies, or listening to commentaries. I've lived, eat, and breathed the art form my whole life. So that was really gratifying. I've always wanted to run into him again, because I think he would remember the conversation. I
Yeah.
think he would, because he couldn't believe it. And he called Brian. It was really funny because when everybody started to show up, we
Mhm.
were still yammering away. And Brian just walked up and got between us and kind of, when he listens, kind of cricks his head to one side. And he was just standing there listening. And Cruz was like, I love this guy. Brian's like, yeah, this is what he does.
Oh,
And
that's
I was like,
awesome.
why couldn't you hire me to work on this movie? Because Tom didn't want behind the scenes on that movie. But it was it was really gratifying. It
Mhm.
was, so that's the thing. I found that most of the people that I've met in the business who are really successful are pretty great people,
Mhm.
which has been something that is both surprising and delightful.
Yeah, that's
So
great.
yeah.
So you would say Star Trek was your favorite movie to do the documentary on. This next question's fucked up. I don't even remember writing this. What project was the least fun to document?
Well, they were all great to document, but one of the Chronicles of Narnia ended really badly.
We've talked about this before, so I know a little bit about it, but for those
Yeah,
who
I
don't
mean,
know,
so when I started Chronicles of Narnia, we basically signed up to work for 2 years, and we were in country for 14 months. And Disney owed me still a great deal of money. And in the middle of everything, 14 months into a 2-year gig, they just decided to pull the plug on this project. Now, I had 15 people working for me. I had a payroll. I'd bought 2 Avid editing systems because rather than rent for 2 years, I mean, as soon as we start shooting tape, we were ingesting it into the system and digitizing it all, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of behind the scenes footage. And then it was real time, when you're ingesting tape. So if we had an hour long tape, those hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage represents days and days and days and days and days of digitizing. You're just playing tapes and digitizing it into the computer before you even start editing. So this project had gone on. Now, what I did not know, and this is what was told to me later, was this was the first time I was normally when you worked for special features, the special features were handled by the home video division. And the money came from the marketing budgets. So there were strict budgets, and it was all copacetic, all great. This was the first time Disney had a crew, a team, us, that was working for both theatrical marketing and home entertainment. So they were splitting the fees. Now, theatrical marketing would hire what's called an EPK crew, an electronic press kit crew, to go behind the scenes and shoot like a couple of days of footage. And they would use it when they would market movies like tonight on so and so, on the Tonight Show, when they'd sometimes show behind the scenes footage or use the behind the scenes footage or interviews for whatever they need it for. So that was theatrical marketing, which is very different than home video. Well, it turned out, I guess, from what I understand, that this had nothing to do with us, but one of our executives at Disney had been hiring a company and giving that company big, like overpaying them so the company would give the executive kickbacks. So the executive was somehow getting some extra cash. Now, this had nothing to do with us, but home video didn't want any impropriety to come back on their division. So they just inexplicably got rid of us. Just got rid of us. And I'm like, you guys you owe me hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I was put in a position, I had to shut my company down. I had this great company, we did Narnia. Well, eventually I had Superman as well, but it was a really terrible. There's a lot of things that a confluence of events that happened that were really, really terrible for me financially, that I had to deal with the financial fallout. And this was one of them. And I figured I'd work with Disney at another company for many years. So I had great relationships with all these guys. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you're killing me, and I have to lay all these people off. They didn't care because they were more whatever was going on internally at Disney that had nothing to do with us. There was nothing we were going to do to alleviate the situation. And I should have sued them because I had an ironclad contract. And I'm like, I don't want to sue Disney. But if I had threatened to sue them, this movie hadn't even come out yet. The last thing they would want to do is have a lawsuit brought about because I would have made it public. And maybe they would have settled. In hindsight, I should have done that because we had a contract and they broke the contract. And even if we were going to get fired, there was a process that we were contractually obligated to go through, which they didn't do. They just said you're fired. And it wasn't like they didn't say we were fired, as a matter of fact. I can't say they said we were fired. They just said that they were pulling the plug on the whole project. And what they ended up doing was they bought, I mean, this is crazy. So this is 2004. They, my drives, I had $35,000 worth of Avid hard drives that were part of the Avid. They were all full of Narnia footage. They paid me $35,000 for my drives. They just bought the drives. Back now, drives cost much, 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 much less. But they just bought the equipment. And it was a real bummer because we had the greatest team. Everybody was excited. I'd hired people that worked on Lord of the Rings. And I have so many emails from all my executives at Disney. This is a really interesting thing. I wrote all the executives at Disney that I was working for. Every week, I wrote them an email that said, here's what we shot for the week. Here's the footage that we have. I did this for 30 weeks. Never got an email back acknowledging. I just decided to do this and send these reports out so they could refer back. Like if they wanted us to get specific footage for marketing or whatever, they would have a documented list of what we'd shot, like which things. And the only thing that they asked us for was they wanted us to get shots of like the lantern when you first got into Narnia and stuff. They wanted us to get material that was on set when all the lights had to be on, and I couldn't get that authorized because to have the crew come in and turn on all the lights, and it was all snow. The sets were all snowed out, and it was fake snow, but I couldn't do that. It was beyond my purview. So that was the one thing I said, we can't really do that. And that was the only thing. Oh, you can't do that. That was the one thing they harped on. They're like, oh, you didn't get us this one thing that we asked. I'm like, the what? I can't go on to and the set was huge. It was this gigantic set. So turning on the lights, just all that electricity cost money. And that was money that was not in anyone's budget. So that was a minor thing, but it really ruined my company, and I had to let everybody go. And it was, imagine you're working on something, you think you're secure for another year.
Right.
And I had to let everybody go. Oh. And it was a horrible day. It was a horrible time. And we were doing great work. They said it was the best behind the scenes footage they'd ever seen for any of their projects. And I'm like, then why are you getting rid of us? It was brutal. Brutal.
All right, Rob. So you've directed, you've produced, you've done Big Starklighter. Out of everything that you've done, what are you most proud of?
Well, the one movie that I directed and co-wrote and edited, Free Enterprise, is probably the thing I'm most proud of. But unfortunately, it's languishing away in a vault. We're trying to get it. Our executive producer apparently doesn't want us to get it for whatever reason. But that was a movie that a friend of mine, Mark Altman, and I kind of wrote about ourselves, and we had this wacky idea about. It was basically wish fulfillment. We both loved Star Trek. We both loved William Shatner as Captain Kirk. And we thought, what if we wrote a movie about, like, what if we got to meet and hang out with William Shatner? What if he was our best friend? What would that be like? And we wrote this movie, and we were so naive. This is back in 97. We just figured, of course he's going to do it. Why wouldn't he do it? And so we wrote this wacky movie, and we got it financed. And, it's still really low budget, but we got him to do the movie. And I don't know if he'll ever admit this, but it really kicked off his career. Not a lot of people saw Free Enterprise, and didn't make any money at the box office because, again, we had opportunities to go with bigger companies, and the company just didn't have a great way to release it. But it kind of became this really culty hit, and I did travel around the world too, so I had a wonderful time. But I'm most proud of that because it was the fulfillment of my goal of making a movie. Like, my lifelong dream of becoming a movie director, I did it. Now, it's been 25 years. Would I like to do it again? Yes. I'm writing a script that I would like to make right now based on a novel. Actually, I have the script is done, and I'd say it's about 80% there. But it was amazing. I mean, it was amazing. And I'll tell you the my father is in the movie, and it was, my parents were very supportive of my love of movies, and very supportive. And it was so funny. I go, Dad, you got to play this bartender, in the movie, and you're gonna have a scene with William Shatner. And like, my dad knew that I made movies. Like, he knew. He didn't watch the whole movie, but when Leatherface came out in theaters, he went to the theater just to watch my name in the credits. And but he didn't. It's one thing to like intellectually know that your son works on movies, but for people that have no connection to Hollywood. So the day that my dad was going to be in this movie, it was our longest day of shooting with Shatner, and we're at this club in Hollywood, in Hollywood, downtown Hollywood, called the Garden of Eden. It's
Okay.
not there. It's not there anymore now, but it was on the corner of La Brea and Hollywood Boulevard, right in the corner. And it was this two-story. It was a beautiful club. It was really cool. And we lit it like it was a classic Star Trek episode. And we had 100 extras in the club. And my dad comes in, and I picked him up at his hotel, and he's like, this is like a real movie. And he couldn't wrap his head around this. And we're shooting. My dad was there the whole time. He's in a couple of scenes, and he couldn't believe that this was actually going on. And then when he sees William Shatner, he's like, because he'd watched me watch Star Trek for decades,
Mm.
And for there was my childhood idol. So my dad was kind of having cognitive dissonance where, he just couldn't. And it was so funny to watch. And I'm, of course, the director.
Mm.
So I'm in the middle of all this. I'm running the whole set. I'm telling everybody what to do. And I've written the script. And then I'm directing my father in the movie. And that was probably the highlight of my life in terms of just a memorable day. And what was amazing was, about a week later, I get a letter from my father in the mail. He went back to Phoenix where he was living, and he said, I couldn't have been prouder of you. I had no idea. And he said, I watched you command 100 people and your entire crew. And you were so nice to everybody, and you knew exactly what you wanted, and everybody respected you. And there you were interacting with the actor I used to watching when you were 5 years old. And he was like, I don't think that a father could be more proud of his son than I was that whole day watching you work.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. And I'm like, I couldn't have imagined it was the greatest thing. I still have that letter. It was the greatest thing you can imagine, and it's interesting because when you're working, you don't think to yourself that you're great. I don't think, because you're just I've been interested in the same stuff my whole life. So I still collect action figures and build model kits of spaceships, and then go work on, right now I'm producing this audio drama with Todd Stashwick, who's an actor on Star Trek Picard season 3. So we're doing that, and you just do stuff. But from people outside that don't know about the entertainment industry, like my dad walks on this set, and I wasn't really aware of the fact that I knew I was bringing my dad to set, but I didn't know that it would affect him. It was more like, I'm going to work, I'm just doing what we're doing. And today happens to be a bigger day than most because we're in a club. And, when I asked my dad, I'm like, yeah, dude, just come be in the movie. Because I wanted him he always smokes cigars. I wanted him to be a cigar smoking bartender. Like, what bartender smokes a cigar? But I wanted my dad to be that guy just to make it weird. It's like, and it worked. It was great. It was one of the greatest days of my life was having my dad on that set.
Oh, that's incredible. What a fun memory. And that also must have felt so rewarding.
Oh, I have a still. I have a still of my father. This is the best Shatner, because he had his cigars in his lapel, in his breast pocket. He had like 3 other cigars in the one he was smoking. And Shatner said, hey, can I have one of your cigars? And I've got a picture of William Shatner leaning over the bar and my dad lighting a cigar for him, for Shatner.
That's awesome.
It's really awesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So
if you were to give advice to somebody who's trying to get into this business, what advice would you give them?
It's interesting. I was asked those questions, the designing Hollywood people. Working in the movie business, there's multiple things that you need to be good at. like depending on what you do. But if you want to make movies, you have to, first of all, you have to have a vision. First and foremost, you have to have something you want to say, obviously. But I think the real key is you have to like people. You have to know how to work with people and all different kinds of people, because a movie set is like a microcosm of society. You have white collar people, you have blue collar, hard workaday people, and then you've got crazy artists. And so a movie set has all different kinds of people from all walks of life. And you need to know how to interact with all different kinds of people. So it is very much, and the movie business is such a social business. I mean, if you want to go be an agent or a studio executive, you still need to know how to deal with people, but that's a whole different trip. But if you want to make movies, you really need to know how. You have to be a student of human beings, and you have to be a student of human behavior. And you also have to be like, it is said that you're only on time in the movie business when you show up early. If you show up on time, you're too late. Never be late. Always be early. And you just have to be very aware of what you're doing. Anyone who's lazy or anyone who shows up and doesn't want to do, you're going to be working for 12 hours a day on a set, probably 14. You have to be ready for that. And unless you really love it and you love the process, if you think you come to do things for the glamour is very fleeting. Most of the time you're in dark rooms editing for months on end, or you're on set working really long, laborious days, and you go home and all you want to do is sleep, and then it starts all over again.
Right.
So, I mean, that's my advice is you should be a student of human behavior of all kinds and be a hard worker. Because people want to work with people they like, because you're with people all the time, and it's an incredibly social business. Right. You're constantly talking to people. And if you don't like to talk to people and you don't like people, you will get fed up and you'll leave the business.
Yeah. So. If you could get a sequel to any project that you've worked on, it didn't have to be something that you edited or something that you produced, anything that you've put your hands on, anything you've touched, what would you want a sequel to?
Well, we were very close to making a sequel to Free Enterprise, and I wrote that script, and it was called Free Enterprise: The Wrath of Shatner. And we were 2 days away from filming that movie, and I was really set on that. But I think that ship has sailed. But if it's something I worked on, I'd love to make a sequel to The Hills Run Red.
Oh, and, yeah.
I would call it The Rivers Run Black.
Ooh.
And yeah, and I have a whole plot in mind about the daughter, the woman, the daughter of the maniacal film director from the movie.
Oh man,
she's grown up and is carrying on her father's work today. And she's a social media influencer, and everyone thinks she's the shit and loves her to death, but she's really a homicidal maniac, but no one knows that.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, I think it would be a lot of fun.
That
the dark web is involved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would love to do that, but unfortunately, we don't own the movie. It's a Warner Brothers movie. I mean, maybe we could go pitch. Like, I've never understood, horror always does so well, and so many movies have sequels. We haven't really tried, but I think if we wanted to, we could easily make The Rivers Run Black.
Oh, that'd be so much fun.
I know.
I would be there. Hopefully, I would be working on
work on the movie. That you would be working on it, and I would make you the art department PA.
And then you can send me to go find a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
And I'd know exactly where to go.
You'd know where to go.
Amazon.
But yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, when I think about what I used to do, like when I was a PA, we had these books called Thomas Guides. And Thomas Guides were these big, thick, they were long books, and they were just maps. And they were maps of the entire LA basin. And, you'd turn the page and you'd figure out where you were. And if you were going off the page, you'd go to page, 47H. And then you go to 47. Every PA had a Thomas Guide in your car. I mean, when I think back, it's only been, a little more than 30 years. But now it would be so much fun to be a PA now, because you're just running around all over the place. But you always know where you're going because of GPS. You can always call and get, okay, do you have these bumper stickers? Great, save them for me. And you just go pick them up. I mean, the job would be so much more, it'd be so much easier today, because another thing I used to love I did work in makeup effects. I worked for
Mhm.
a company called Altarian Studios, and I was a runner. I ran around. I was a PA there, but I'd have to drive like hundreds of miles a day, and you got paid per mile. And I did not dawdle, and so I was always like the fastest PA because I wouldn't even stop for lunch. I'd get food and keep driving because the more ground I covered, the more money I made. So nowadays with GPS, where you wouldn't even have to spend time looking to where you were going and figuring out where you're going to go, you just punch it in. I mean, I'd make a shit ton more money than I made back in the day. It'd be great. I mean,
Oh man.
it would be fun to be a PA because being a PA, if you were kind of a go-getter and you're like all cheerful,
Mhm.
people liked you and you became friends with everybody on the crew.
Mhm.
So there was always something to do on Saturday nights. Hey, you want to come out with us? Sure, let's go. It was a great life to be young and working on movies. It was great.
Oh man.
I got into lots of trouble in a good way.
Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you. That was so much fun going over your very impressive career. You must be so proud because just being your friend, I'm so proud of you. Like when we were at Comic-Con and I sat in the front row for your panel on Free Enterprise, I was just so proud hearing you speak and talk about your work and your life. And it's just so incredible, so inspiring. Thank you for doing this interview and thank you for being
Oh,
someone that I can look up to in the industry. I know that Whining About Movies is coming back. If you want to talk a little bit about that and where people can follow you and find your YouTube channel, even though everyone knows, but just in case.
yeah. Well, I have a YouTube. It's so funny. It's weird to think in April it will be 9 years I've been doing YouTube,
Oh,
which
wow.
blows me away. And I became a YouTuber. My friend John Schnepp, who passed away, he's a filmmaker and he worked in animation and he made documentaries. And he calls me up one day and he goes, "Hey man, you want to come on this YouTube show?" And like I watched trailers on YouTube back in 2015. Like I didn't pay much attention. I wasn't watching YouTube shows. I wasn't watching YouTubers. It was totally not my thing. And so I go, okay. And so I started doing this. It was at first it was a weekly show, Collider Heroes, where he talked about comic books and the first comic book movies. And the first day I walk in, I meet John Schnepp and I met John Campia. And we started doing this show together. And I didn't pay much attention to it because I would walk in, do the show, and walk out. So I didn't get to really know anybody that worked there. And then I started doing this movie trivia schmodown thing, and I was doing that with them. But again, I would walk in, do my thing, and walk out. And I wasn't even aware, like I wasn't paying attention to the fact that I was on YouTube. And so I started to get recognized in the wild.
Mhm.
People would be like I was at a Coldplay concert with Elizabeth, and someone's like, "Oh my God, you're Robert Meyer Burnett." And it's weird because I don't call myself Robert Meyer Burnett. I use
Mhm.
that name professionally. Everyone just calls me Rob.
Mhm.
But now people, because I've been on YouTube, people call me Robert Meyer Burnett. I'm like, I like it better when they just say RMB.
Yeah.
It's good.
Or my nickname's the Sultan of Sugar Daddies, the Titan of Twerking. I have them
Those are
all.
those are good too. But no, it's been a lot of fun and I've met a lot of people.
Mhm.
My YouTube channel is still growing, obviously. I really want my next goal in life is I have like 63,000 subscribers. I want to get 40,000 more because I want that button.
Oh yeah.
I
Mhm.
want the 100,000
The
YouTube
plaque.
plaque because I'm never going to get a million subscribers just because I'm not that kind of person. But
You never know.
no, yeah, but I want that plaque. I want just as a
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah, that would be so rewarding too.
Yeah.
And then you display it on the shelf. That'd be
Yeah,
crazy.
that's what I want. Because
Yeah.
I look at those YouTubers and like, God damn it. They've
Oh
all got their
man.
plaques. I want my plaque. Where is it? So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so you can find me on the Burnett Work
Mhm.
on YouTube. And I do a Robservation show usually 3 times a week. And then we do Let's Get Physical Media on Sundays and then all other shows. But then Elizabeth and I, my girlfriend and I, we did a show that really was born out of the pandemic
Mhm.
because it was like everything was shut down and we need to make money. So we started a show called Whining About Movies, where we shared a bottle of wine and talk about movies. Yes, we're going to bring it back, and our first movie is going to be Attack of the Clones, the Star Wars
Ooh.
movie
All
Attack of the
right.
Clones, because
All
no one
right.
likes Attack of the Clones. So I figured, let's do
Whoa, whoa,
Attack of the
whoa. Hold on,
Clones.
hold on. I love Attack of the
Me
Clones.
too. I love Attack of the Clones too.
That'll be so fun. Actually,
Yeah.
Elizabeth would be a great interview on the channel too, because I love her artwork. When I got to go to that gallery that she had, the
Oh yeah.
gallery opening,
She's doing some
incredible.
amazing stuff now. Yeah, she's doing some really, really cool stuff
Oh,
now.
I
She's
can't wait
doing
to
this
see.
these two gigantic paintings because she has her senior show or something
Mhm.
coming up on April 16th or something or
Ooh,
something
okay.
like
You'll
that.
have to let me know and I'll
Yeah, yeah,
go
yeah. I'll
because it
tell
was
you.
so cool to see. Because I've been following Elizabeth on Instagram for years, so I've been seeing her artwork. And then when I went to that gallery and I got to see it in person, I was just like blown away. I was like fanning out over her art. It was so
Yeah.
much fun.
Yeah, so it's going to be great. That was something we did. We did like 140 episodes of whining about movies.
Wow.
That means I had 140 bottles of wine.
Oh my gosh, that's a typical Tuesday for me. But thank you so
um,
much. You know what we should do? St. Patrick's Day is coming up, and last year on St. Patrick's Day, you and I went to that fucked up bar where wasn't
oh
there like a
my.
parrot, and then like there
And
was
then
some
there was
weird
somebody like
shit.
got beat up on the and
Oh,
was remember
yeah,
the ambulance came and they were
yeah. And it wasn't for us. There was like the fire department and an ambulance and a stretcher. We took a selfie in front of the stretcher. We were like, hey,
that was a truly that was a dive
if
bar.
that place still exists and hasn't burnt to the ground again, we should go.
Oh, we should totally go because that's next month.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the scene of the crime.
Yeah, back to the scene of the crime. Oh man. Well, Rob, it's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. I am so appreciative of this, and I learned a little bit because I knew I knew a lot, but it was very informative and very fun for me, and I'm sure the viewers will appreciate this. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, it was my pleasure, dude. This is Taylor. It's always good to see you. This is fun. You know, again, we met because of the internet,
Yeah,
whether it
we
was
did.
whining about movies and then
Tinder.
Campy show,
Yeah.
Tinder, right? Shh, don't tell anybody.
Well,
Don't
thank you,
tell.
Rob. I'll see you again.
Grinder.
Yeah. Farmers only. All right. Thank you everyone for joining us and I'll see you guys again soon.
All right.
Bye.